"You'll thank her one day," my mother-in-law whispered to my husband as he stood by the front door with a suitcase in his hand. And that was the moment I realized his leaving us had never been a decision made in pain or confusion, but a plan built carefully behind my back. I was standing in the nursery with our twins, one in each arm, still learning how to hold my own body together after weeks of broken sleep and quiet worry, and I remember how strange it felt that the house was so still. The bottle warmer hummed on the kitchen counter. A load of baby clothes spun in the dryer downstairs. The yellow lamp in the corner cast a soft light over the rocking chair Ethan had once insisted we buy because he said he wanted our children to have a peaceful room, a room that felt safe, a room where they would always know they were loved. I believed him then. Maybe that was my first mistake. Margaret Bennett had arrived an hour earlier with a peach pie and that smooth smile she wore whenever she was about to say something cruel in the gentlest voice possible. She stood in my kitchen like she belonged there more than I did, moving a stack of clean bottles aside to set down her purse, glancing around the room with the same expression she used at antique malls, as if she were evaluating something old and not especially valuable. "You look tired, Claire," she had said, though of course I looked tired. I was 29 years old with 2 6-week-old babies, a husband who had grown quieter by the day, and a mother-in-law who had begun showing up so often that even the walls felt tense when she walked in. Ethan barely looked at me that evening. He kept checking his phone, rubbing the back of his neck, stepping outside and back in again, as if he were rehearsing something he still didn't know how to say. And when he finally said it, he didn't even say my name first. He just stared at the diaper bag by the couch and muttered, "I need some time to think." Some time. As if marriage were a weekend trip he could postpone. As if fatherhood were a meeting he could reschedule. I looked at his suitcase, then at the babies, then at him. And what shocked me most was not that he was leaving. It was that Margaret did not look surprised. She looked relieved. She stepped beside him, laid one hand against his sleeve, and gave him the kind of nod mothers give little boys before a school recital. Approval. Permission. Pride. That was when she leaned close and said it, low enough to sound private, clear enough that I still heard every word. "You'll thank me one day." Lily stirred against my shoulder. Liam began to fuss. I remember bouncing them both gently, out of instinct more than calm, and feeling something inside me go completely still. Not shattered. Not dramatic. Just still. The kind of stillness that comes when your heart finally stops arguing with what your eyes have known for weeks. Ethan picked up the suitcase. He said he would call. He said this was not forever. He said a few other thin, careful things that drifted through the room like paper scraps. I did not answer. I stood there in that pale nursery, holding our children while the man who had promised to build a life with us walked out under his mother's watchful gaze. And when the front door closed, I understood that whatever had broken in my marriage had not broken that night. That night was simply when they decided I was finally supposed to see it. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise because both babies were crying at once, and for a few confused seconds I reached across the bed expecting to find Ethan beside me, warm and half asleep, the way he used to be when life still felt ordinary. My hand touched cold sheets. That was how the truth entered me for the second time, quieter than the first, and somehow heavier. I fed Liam first because his cries had turned sharp and desperate, then Lily because she always waited a little longer, as if she had already learned that in this house patience mattered more than fairness. The sky outside the bedroom window was the pale gray of early spring, and the maple tree in the front yard stood perfectly still. Nothing looked broken. That was the hardest part. The dishwasher still needed unloading. 3 unopened boxes of newborn diapers were stacked by the pantry door. Ethan's coffee mug sat in the sink with a brown ring dried at the bottom. Everything in that house looked like a life that was still intact, and yet I had never felt more alone. By 8 o'clock, I had changed 4 diapers, washed 2 bottles, reheated the same cup of coffee 3 times, and checked my phone enough to feel embarrassed with myself. No missed calls. No text from Ethan. No apology. Just a message from Margaret sent at 7:12 in the morning, as calm as a weather report. "I think a little space will be good for everyone. Do not make this harder than it needs to be." I stared at those words while Lily slept against my chest and Liam kicked weakly in his bassinet. A little space. As if what had happened was mutual. As if I had been consulted. as if two tiny babies could be placed on a shelf while a grown man sorted through his feelings under his mother's supervision. I did not answer her. Around noon, I forced myself to shower while the twins slept in their swings just outside the bathroom door. I could hear every creak in the house over the rush of water. The floors, the vent in the hallway, the dryer clicking off downstairs. Each sound made me feel like I needed to hurry, as if someone might come in and tell me I had no right to take 10 minutes for myself in my own home. When I caught my reflection in the fogged mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. My hair was twisted into a loose knot that had half fallen down. There were faint shadows under my eyes. My t-shirt had a spot of formula near the collar. I looked young and worn out at the same time, which I had not known was possible until motherhood. By late afternoon, the silence in the house had changed. It no longer felt temporary. It felt arranged, deliberate. I began to see the last few months with painful clarity. Ethan pulling away every time I tried to talk about the future. Margaret insisting she knew what was best for our family. The way she had started using phrases like long-term stability and practical decisions, always with that same soft voice, as if coldness became kindness when dressed in careful language. I sat in the nursery that evening with one baby asleep in my lap, and the other tucked against my shoulder, and I understood something I had been too exhausted to name before. Ethan had not left in one night. He had been leaving us inch by inch for weeks, maybe longer, and Margaret had been there for every step, guiding him toward the door while I was too busy loving our children to notice how wide she had already opened it. On the third day, while both babies were finally asleep at the same time, I began doing the kind of quiet work that makes pain feel practical. I folded tiny onesies still warm from the dryer. I lined up bottles on the counter. I made a grocery list on the back of an old electric bill and tried to calculate how long our savings would last if I only bought what we absolutely needed. Formula, diapers, gas. The basic shape of survival had become very small. Around 10 o'clock, I opened the hall closet to look for the file box where we kept our household papers, the one Ethan always said was too important to leave lying around. It was gone. At first, I thought I had simply forgotten where we had moved it after the twins were born, because sleep deprivation had turned my memory into something thin and unreliable. I checked the office closet, the laundry room shelf, the cabinet over the refrigerator where we kept old tax returns and instruction manuals. Nothing. I stood in the middle of the kitchen with the refrigerator humming behind me and felt that same cold stillness settle into my chest. By noon, I had found 3 more things missing. Ethan's passport, the folder with our mortgage statements, the Navy notebook where I had written down every doctor appointment, payment due date, and household login since the babies were born. None of it was dramatic enough to look like a robbery. It looked organized, selective, thought through. That afternoon, Margaret came by without calling. She knocked once and then opened the front door before I had even reached it, carrying a paper bag from the bakery downtown as if she were stopping in to visit a friend. The smell of cinnamon rolls filled the entryway, sweet and almost offensive in that moment. She glanced at my face, then passed me toward the living room where Lily was sleeping in the bassinet and Liam was making soft, restless sounds in his swing. "You should really keep the house quieter," she said, handing me the bag. "Babies pick up on tension." I took the bag because I did not know what else to do with my hands. She walked into my kitchen, set down her purse, and looked around with the same calm ownership she always seemed to carry into my home. "Have you heard from Ethan?" I asked. She did not answer right away. She smoothed a wrinkle from her sleeve, then opened a cabinet and took out a plate as if she had every right. "He needs time to clear his head," she said. "There has been a lot of pressure on him." I almost laughed at that, not because it was funny, but because it was so carefully dishonest. Pressure. As if the weight in this house had ever fallen on anyone but me. I watched her place a cinnamon roll on the plate and realized she was perfectly comfortable here because she believed the outcome had already been decided. Then she said something that made every piece fall into place. "It is better this way," she told me, her voice soft and even. "You are young enough to start over, and Ethan is not built for all of this responsibility." All of this responsibility. Her eyes flicked toward the twins. Just for a second. It was enough. I saw it then with painful clarity. She had never thought of this as a family under strain. She had thought of it as a burden to remove from her son. I stood there with that bakery bag in my hand, staring at the woman who had smiled through every baby shower photo and every Sunday dinner, and I understood that what I was facing was not a misunderstanding. It was a strategy, and I had been the last person in the house to recognize it. I did not cry after Margaret left. I picked up the untouched cinnamon roll, wrapped it in foil, and placed it on the top shelf of the refrigerator beside a carton of milk and 2 small jars of baby food we would not need for months. I do not know why I remember that detail so clearly. Maybe because grief often hides inside ordinary movements. Maybe because I needed one simple thing I could finish from beginning to end. The twins woke a few minutes later, one after the other, as if even their sleep had learned not to ask too much of me at once. I changed Liam on the living room floor because the nursery changing table was piled with folded blankets and unopened wipes. Then I carried Lily to the rocker and fed her while staring at the window over the front yard. A delivery truck stopped across the street. Mrs. Henley from next door checked her mail in pink slippers and a denim robe. Somewhere down the block, a lawn mower started up. The whole neighborhood sounded so steady, so painfully unchanged, and I sat there with my daughter in my arms thinking how strange it was that a life could split in half without making any noise at all. That evening, after the babies were asleep, I walked through the house and saw it differently. Not as the home Ethan and I had made, but as a place full of clues I had mistaken for stress, fatigue, and the growing pains of new parenthood. His dresser drawers were half empty. 3 of his winter coats were gone. The framed sonogram picture from his nightstand had disappeared, leaving behind a clean square in the dust. In the garage, the plastic storage bin with old college sweatshirts and camping gear was missing from the top shelf. He had not left in confusion. He had been packing in pieces, quietly enough that I only noticed once the silence had room to echo. I sat down at the kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote everything I could remember from the past 2 months. Dates, comments, arguments that never quite became arguments. Margaret insisting that twins were too much for a first-time mother. Ethan suddenly asking whether we really needed such a large car seat stroller. A conversation about money that ended the moment I entered the room. A Sunday dinner where Margaret had smiled over roast chicken and asked whether I had considered moving closer to my parents for support, as if she were planting a harmless thought instead of measuring how easily I could be displaced. The more I wrote, the clearer the pattern became. She had never attacked me directly. That would have been easier to fight. Instead, she had worked in soft layers, one suggestion at a time, one doubt at a time, until Ethan started speaking her language without even noticing it. Practical. Overwhelmed. Temporary. Best for everyone. Words that sounded reasonable until you looked at what they were covering. Just after 9, my phone finally lit up with Ethan's name. I stared at it until it almost stopped ringing, then answered on the last second with Lily asleep against my chest and Liam in the bassinet beside me. There was a pause, then his voice, careful and distant, like he was calling about a missed appointment instead of the wreckage of our family. He asked how the babies were. I told him they were fine. He asked if I was managing. I told him I was. Another pause. Then he said, "Mom thinks it would be better if we took some time before making anything harder." I closed my eyes. Not because I was hurt. Because I was finally done being confused. Even in that moment, he was not speaking from his own heart. He was borrowing hers. And as I listened to the man I married sound more and more like the woman who had always wanted me gone, I understood something that frightened me more than being abandoned. If I kept waiting for Ethan to wake up on his own, Margaret would keep deciding the shape of my life until there was nothing left in it that belonged to me. The next week taught me that survival does not arrive with music or revelation. It arrives in small, unglamorous decisions made while you are too tired to feel heroic. I called the electric company and asked for a payment extension. I switched to the store brand of everything I could. I stopped buying the lavender coffee creamer Ethan liked, and chose the cheapest carton of half and half instead. I sold the stroller attachment we had never used and 2 decorative lamps from the guest room that had always been more pretty than necessary. Every dollar had a job. Every hour did too. The twins learned their own rhythms, or maybe I learned mine around theirs. Liam liked to be held upright after feeding, his small head heavy against my collarbone. Lily slept best with one hand curled near her cheek, as if she were guarding a secret even in dreams. I began measuring my days in ounces of formula, minutes of sleep, and the distance between one load of laundry and the next. That was what life looked like when no one was coming to rescue you. On Friday morning, I drove to the bank with both babies in the back seat and a folder of papers in my purse, hoping to move money from our joint account into my personal savings before anything else shifted under my feet. The woman at the desk was kind in the careful way strangers often are when they sense you are holding yourself together by routine alone. She typed for a moment, frowned, and then told me the account now required 2 signatures for any transfer over $500. I stared at her, certain I had misunderstood. Ethan and I had never set it up that way. She apologized and turned the screen slightly toward herself, as if the extra privacy would soften the blow. The change had been made 4 days earlier. For days. The same morning I had been home learning how to burp 2 babies at once while my husband and his mother were apparently rearranging the walls around me. I thanked her because I had been raised to stay polite even when the floor shifted, gathered my papers, and carried both car seats back through the parking lot with a strange calm settling over me. The spring wind was cool, and Lily had kicked one sock halfway off. Liam was making that sleepy chirping sound he made right before a nap. 2 elderly women near the pharmacy door smiled at the babies and said I had my hands full. I smiled back and said, I do. Because it was easier than explaining that my hands were full, because someone had intentionally emptied the rest of my life. That afternoon, I went through the kitchen junk drawer looking for a stamp and found a folded receipt from a moving company tucked between takeout menus and spare batteries. Local storage unit rental. 1 month paid in advance. The date was from nearly 3 weeks before Ethan left. I sat down on the floor with that receipt in my hand and let the truth settle without argument. He had not been wandering in confusion. He had been preparing an exit while I was recovering, feeding babies, and trusting the man I married to mean the vows he had spoken. At 5:30, Margaret called. I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice was gentle, composed, almost warm. She asked whether I had considered staying with my parents for a while. She said the house might be too much for me alone. She said Ethan was overwhelmed and needed peace, as if peace were something women like me were expected to provide at our own expense. I looked around the kitchen while she spoke. The dish towel hanging from the oven handle. The baby monitor on the counter. The legal pad where I had started writing down dates and details. For the first time since Ethan walked out, I did not feel shocked by her. I felt instructed, studied, managed, and something in me refused it. I told her, as evenly as I could, that I was not leaving my home and that if Ethan wanted distance, he could keep taking it from somewhere else. She was quiet for a beat too long. Then she said, in that same soft voice, Claire, do not make this harder than it has to be. I looked at my children sleeping in their swings, at the small socks drying over the edge of the laundry basket, at the life I was still holding together with both hands, and I understood that harder for her meant a future she could not script. That was the first moment I felt something sturdier than pain. Not strength exactly. Not yet. But resistance. Small. Quiet. Real. By the second week, the house no longer felt like a place where I was waiting for someone to come back. It felt like a place I was learning to defend. I stopped glancing at the driveway every time headlights passed the window. I stopped checking my phone before bed, hoping for a message that would somehow sound different from all the others. Ethan texted twice that week, both times asking about the babies in the careful, distant tone of a man trying to remain attached to the parts of fatherhood that did not require courage. I answered with facts. Their pediatrician appointment went well. Liam had gained 6 ounces. Lily was sleeping in 3-hour stretches at night. I did not add that Liam had started turning his head toward the sound of my voice, or that Lily made a soft humming noise when I rocked her in the dark. Those details belonged to the person who stayed. On Wednesday afternoon, I took the twins to their checkup and nearly turned around in the parking lot, because getting 2 infants, a diaper bag, and myself into a doctor's office without help felt like an Olympic event designed by someone with a cruel sense of humor. But I did it. I parked crooked, fixed it on the second try, lifted one car seat in each hand, and walked through those sliding glass doors with my shoulders burning and my jaw set. The nurse at the front desk smiled and said, "You have your hands full, Mama." And this time I did not smile politely back. This time I said, "Yes, but I am managing," and heard something new in my own voice. Not confidence. Not yet. Just refusal. In the waiting room, while Liam slept under a blue muslin blanket and Lily stared solemnly at the ceiling lights, A woman across from me kept glancing over with the shy concern of someone trying not to intrude. She looked to be in her 40s, with chestnut hair pulled into a low ponytail and the kind of face that made kindness seem natural rather than performative. When one of the babies began to fuss just as the receptionist called another patient's name, she stood and held the door open for me without making it awkward. Later, while I was trying to snap one car seat back into its base with one hand and keep the diaper bag from sliding off my shoulder with the other, she appeared beside me in the parking lot. "You need an extra hand?" she asked. I almost said no on instinct. Pride is a funny thing. It survives even when your marriage does not. But Lily had started crying, and the car seat buckle was twisted, and the wind kept blowing a loose strand of hair across my face, so I nodded. Her name was Rachel Moore. She drove a silver SUV with 2 soccer magnets on the back and a cracked corner on one taillight. She did not ask invasive questions. She did not tilt her head with pity. She simply helped me settle the babies and then handed me the diaper bag as if it weighed nothing. "I have seen you here before," she said. "You are doing this alone, aren't you?" The words were plain, not dramatic, and because of that they landed somewhere deeper than sympathy usually could. I looked at her for a second too long before answering. "Yes," I said. "I guess I am." Rachel nodded once, as if I had confirmed something she already respected. Then she reached into her purse, pulled out a business card, and handed it to me. She worked for a local television station, not on camera, but on community stories and weekend features. "I am putting together a piece next month about young mothers rebuilding after hard turns," she said. "Not tragedy. Strength. Real life. If you ever want to talk, call me." I glanced at the card, then back at her, unsure what surprised me more, the offer itself or the fact that for the first time since Ethan left, someone was looking at me and seeing more than a problem to be managed. She was seeing a person still standing. I tucked the card into my wallet beside my driver's license and the wrinkled grocery receipt I had been meaning to throw away. Then I drove home with both babies asleep in the back seat, and that small rectangle of cardstock resting in my purse like a match not yet struck. For 3 days, Rachel's card stayed tucked in my wallet while I moved through the same tight circle of feeding, burping, washing, rocking, and trying not to think too far ahead. I would see the edge of it every time I reached for my debit card at the grocery store or my insurance card at the pharmacy, and each time I told myself I was too tired, too overwhelmed, too private for something like television. My life did not feel like a story. It felt like a sink full of bottles and a pile of clean laundry I had not folded yet. It felt like heating soup with one hand while bouncing Liam against my shoulder with the other. It felt like standing in the kitchen at 2 in the morning with Lily fussing softly in her bassinet and wondering whether I had remembered to pay the water bill. But on the 4th day, the washing machine started making a grinding sound halfway through a load of baby clothes, and I stood there in the laundry room with one damp burp cloth in my hand and realized I could not keep pretending that endurance alone was a plan. That afternoon, while both babies slept for the first time in hours, I called Rachel. She answered on the second ring with the steady voice of someone who knew how to make room for people without crowding them. I expected questions I would not want to answer. Instead, she asked whether it was a good time to talk and whether the babies were resting. Something in that simple courtesy loosened a knot in me I had not known I was carrying. I told her a little. Not everything. Just enough. My husband had left. His mother had been involved. I was trying to keep the house, keep the bills paid, keep myself upright. Rachel listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "What I am working on is not about exposing anybody. It is about women who are rebuilding in real time. Honest, ordinary strength. The kind people live past every day without anyone noticing." I sat at the kitchen table staring at a formula stain on the sleeve of my sweatshirt while Liam slept in the portable bassinet beside me. No one had described my life that way before. Not as strength. Not as rebuilding. The station was doing a weekend community feature on local parents who had turned hard seasons into something useful for others. Rachel had heard from a church pantry coordinator that I had started organizing my extra unopened baby supplies into small care bags for 2 young mothers in the neighborhood who were struggling. I had not thought of that as anything special. Just diapers I could spare, travel wipes, 2 onesies Liam had already outgrown, and the extra pacifiers neither baby liked. But Rachel said that was exactly why the story mattered. "You are not asking for pity," she told me. "You are creating stability out of chaos. People need to see that." The interview would be simple. A short home visit, some footage of daily life, a few questions about motherhood, resilience, and community support. No ambush, no spectacle, no mention of private details unless I chose to share them. After I hung up, I walked through the house with new eyes. The faded welcome mat by the front door, the stack of folded receiving blankets on the couch, the handwritten schedule taped to the refrigerator with feeding times and pediatrician reminders. Nothing about it looked polished. Nothing looked television-worthy. Yet for the first time in weeks, I did not see failure when I looked around. I saw proof. Proof that the lights were still on. Proof that both babies were safe. Proof that I had not disappeared just because someone had decided I was easier to leave than to love properly. The next morning, I called the church pantry coordinator and asked whether she still needed help sorting donations on Tuesdays. She said yes before I had finished the sentence. By noon, I had washed my hair, put on a clean sweater, and packed the diaper bag with more intention than usual. I was not doing any of it for Ethan. I was not doing it for Margaret. I was not even doing it for television, not really. I was doing it because Rachel had handed me a mirror I had not known I needed, and in it I saw a woman who was exhausted, yes, but not defeated. A woman whose life had been cracked open and who was still, somehow, building something steady with both hands. And deep down, beneath the fatigue and the quiet dread and the stack of unpaid things still waiting to be solved, I felt the first small flicker of something warmer than resistance. I felt the beginning of direction. The segment aired on a Sunday evening, just after the local weather and before a feature about spring festivals downtown. Rachel had warned me that television always made ordinary things look slightly brighter and slightly stranger, but when I saw myself on the screen holding Lily while Liam slept against my shoulder, nothing looked strange at all. It looked true. The camera moved slowly through my kitchen, past the drying rack full of bottles and the handwritten notes on the refrigerator, then settled on my face while I talked about the church pantry, the care bags for new mothers, and the strange discipline of rebuilding a life in small pieces. I did not mention Ethan by name. I did not say a single bitter thing about Margaret. I did not need to. The story did not frame me as abandoned. It showed me as present. That mattered more. Rachel had asked careful questions, and I had answered them with the kind of honesty that no longer trembled. I talked about exhaustion, about learning that stability is often built quietly, about the difference between being helped and being seen. When the camera caught Liam stretching in his sleep and Lily blinking up at me with those serious dark eyes, I felt something shift inside me. Not pride exactly. Something steadier. Recognition. As if I were finally witnessing my own life from the outside and understanding that surviving it had a shape after all. The piece ended with footage from the church fellowship hall, where I was sorting diapers and wipes into paper sacks while two other women labeled shelves behind me. The anchor called it a story about resilience, community, and unexpected leadership. I almost laughed when I heard that last word. Leadership. 3 weeks earlier, I could barely finish a cup of coffee while it was still warm. And yet there it was, spoken aloud in a calm studio voice, as if it had been true all along. After the segment ended, my phone stayed quiet for nearly 10 minutes. Then it began. First a text from Mrs. Henley next door, saying she had seen me on Channel 8 and was proud of me. Then a voicemail from the pantry coordinator. Then 3 missed calls from numbers I did not know. At 9:22, Ethan called. I looked at his name on the screen and felt no rush of relief, no collapsing hope, only a cool, alert stillness. I let it ring once more before answering. He did not say hello right away. For a moment, all I could hear was breathing and a muffled sound in the background, maybe a television still on in another room. Then he said, very quietly, "Claire, I just saw the segment." I stood by the kitchen counter with one hand resting on Lily's bassinet and listened to the man who had left us search for a voice that sounded like his own. He told me the babies looked bigger. He said I looked tired, then immediately corrected himself and said I looked strong. He asked why I had not told him things were this hard. That question settled over me like dust, light, and almost insulting in its timing. I looked around the room as he spoke. The folded blankets on the chair. The bottle of infant gas drops beside the sink. The mail I had sorted into neat stacks because chaos always looks smaller when you line it up. "I did tell you," I said. "You just were not listening." He was silent after that, long enough that I could imagine the expression on his face without seeing it. Shame has a posture. I had learned that recently. When he finally spoke again, his voice had lost some of its careful distance. He asked if he could come by. Not tonight, just soon. To see the twins. To talk. Before I answered, I heard another voice in the background, faint but familiar, asking who he was talking to. Margaret. Even blurred by distance, I recognized the shape of her intrusion. And in that moment, I understood the true power of what had happened. Ethan had not just seen us on television. He had seen us outside the version of the story his mother had built for him. He had seen our children alive and real, not abstract responsibilities discussed in another room. He had seen me standing upright in the middle of a life he had been told would collapse without him. And somewhere in that bright, ordinary broadcast, the spell of her language had cracked. 2 days later, Ethan came by at 4:15 in the afternoon, just as the light began to shift across the living room carpet and the twins were settling into that brief, quiet stretch between feeding and evening fussiness. I had spent the morning doing ordinary things on purpose. I vacuumed the hallway. I folded baby towels. I wiped down the kitchen counters and opened the windows for 10 minutes to let in the cool spring air. Not because I wanted the house to look perfect for him, because I wanted to remind myself that this was still my home before it became the setting for any conversation he thought he was ready to have. When the doorbell rang, I did not rush. I crossed the room at my own pace and opened the door to find him standing there with a paper gift bag from the pharmacy in one hand and an expression I had once mistaken for gentleness, but now recognized as uncertainty. He looked thinner, tired. His hair needed cutting. There was a crease in his shirt like he had been sitting in the car for a long time before working up the nerve to come inside. For one suspended second, neither of us spoke. Then I stepped back and let him in. He looked around the living room as if he were seeing it for the first time. The baby swings near the couch. The basket of folded blankets. The stack of pantry forms and utility notices I had tucked neatly beside the lamp because I no longer believed in hiding the effort required to keep a life standing. Liam was awake first. Ethan moved toward the bassinet slowly, almost cautiously, and when he saw his son's face clearly, something in him faltered. He reached down, then hesitated, then looked at me for permission. I nodded once. He lifted Liam with the clumsy care of someone handling something both precious and unfamiliar, and the sight of it did not soften me the way it once might have. It simply clarified the cost of absence. Lily woke a minute later and began making those small searching noises she made when she wanted to be picked up. I gathered her into my arms and stayed where I was across from him. The coffee table between us like a quiet border neither of us tried to ignore. Ethan asked how often they were sleeping now. He asked whether Lily still favored turning her head to the right. He asked if Liam always made that little sighing sound after a bottle. I answered him the way I had been answering his texts for weeks. Truthfully, briefly, without offering more warmth than the moment had earned. After a while, he set Liam back into the bassinet and looked down at his hands. I was wrong, he said. Not dramatic, not polished, just late. I did not interrupt. He told me he had let Margaret convince him that leaving for a while would force clarity, that he had believed he was too overwhelmed to be useful, that every conversation with her had made escape sound temporary and almost reasonable. Then he admitted what I had already known in my bones long before he could say it aloud. She had helped him move things. She had told him I would be better off leaning on my parents. She had said twins were too much strain for a young marriage, and that some women were stronger on their own than men were in the wrong situation. He spoke quietly, as if lowering his voice might make the truth less ugly. I stood there holding Lily and listened without rescuing him from any part of it. When he finished, he finally looked at me directly. I do not know how I let it go that far, he said. I believed him. Weakness is often more believable than cruelty. But belief is not the same thing as trust, and I had learned the difference in the hardest way possible. I told him he did not get to come back into this house, as if seeing us on television had rewritten what he chose when no one was watching. I told him the babies deserved consistency, not guilt in a nicer shirt. I told him that if he wanted to be part of their lives, he would do it slowly, clearly, and with actions that did not depend on his mother's approval or collapse the moment life felt inconvenient. He sat very still while I spoke. No excuses, no wounded pride. Just the quiet face of a man finally hearing the full shape of his own failure. Then, as if the afternoon had been waiting for one last test, my phone lit up on the side table. Margaret. Her name glowed on the screen between us. Ethan saw it, and for the first time since I had known him, he did not reach for the easier voice in the room. He did not tell me to answer it. He did not defend her. He only looked at the phone, then at me, and said, "You do not have to pick up." So I did not. It rang until it stopped. Then the house went quiet again except for Lily's soft breathing and the faint creak of the nursery rocker in the next room. Ethan stood a few minutes later, set the pharmacy bag on the counter, and said he would call tomorrow to ask when he could see the twins again. I told him I would think about it. After he left, I checked the bag. Diapers, baby gas drops, a box of wipes. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that erased anything. But also, for once, not a performance staged by his mother's script. I carried the supplies to the nursery, put them away one item at a time, and looked down at my children sleeping under the fading gold of the late afternoon light. The woman I had been when Ethan walked out would have mistaken his return for an ending. She would have thought being chosen again was the same thing as being restored. But the woman I had become knew better. I was not waiting to be taken back into anyone's certainty. I had built something steadier than that. And whatever happened next, whether Ethan learned how to become a father without first asking his mother who he should be, whether our marriage survived or remained only a lesson written across these rooms, one truth no longer moved under anyone else's hand. He had left. I had stayed. And in the silence that followed, I had become someone neither of them had planned for.